Leonardo da Vinci, Chapter 10, The Medici Made Me and Broke Me. It looked as if Milan would continue to be kind to Leonardo. One of the first commissions after his return should have made him forget his biggest disappointment, the bronze horse of Forza. Now another man wanted an equestrian statue. The marshal of Chamoun's army, a Milanese named Trivulzio, decided that he would provide for his own tomb before he died. He ordered from Leonardo a statue of himself on horseback. It was to be life-sized in bronze. This was nothing like the giant statue Lodovico had ordered, but it was a splendid idea, especially as he also wanted the tomb designed by the artist on a grand scale. Once again, Leonardo went happily to work studying horses and making sketches. The problem of the background and the base was complicated, but that was just the sort of thing he enjoyed because it was an engineer's job. Since he was never satisfied with just one interest at a time, he also turned his attention to his treatise on water. This led him to go on thinking about hydraulics. At the same time, he put his studies to practical use and worked at improving the canal system of Lombardy. He studied the mechanics of locks in these canals. He planned an efficient way to dam the river that flowed past Milan, and a new method for draining swamps. This led him to study the behavior of water in whirlpools and eddies, as well as the motion of air imprisoned beneath water. From that he went on to observe eddies of air, little cyclones, and great storms. He saw that air was governed by the same laws of behavior that ordered water. "I have seen movements of the air so furious," he wrote, "that they have carried, mixed up in their course, the largest trees of the forest and whole roofs of great palaces, and I have seen the same fury of the air bore a hole with a whirling movement, digging out a gravel pit and carrying gravel, sand, and water more than half a mile through the air. Those must have been happy days for a man whose only genuine pleasure was in study of this sort." Nobody was pushing Leonardo around anymore. He did not have to work too hard at paintings when they began to bore him. He had the means to buy equipment for experiments. He had intelligent patrons who took an interest in the things that interested him. It is pleasant to think of Leonardo at this time, absorbed in his writing and his thoughts, breaking off work in the studio to watch a river in flood, or a clear night sky full of stars. Now he was 57 years old. At about this time someone painted his portrait. In this he looks older than his age, but very alert and thoughtful. It was too good to last. Life in 16th century Italy was never peaceful for many years at a stretch. Early in the year 1509, Louis XII came back to prepare for attack in a new war. He rode at the head of a powerful army. This time he was battling the Republic of Venice. Venetian armies were already on the march, aiming for Milan. Louis's Frenchmen, as well as the Milanese, were eager to go out and meet them on the field. Leonardo went with them in his capacity of king's military engineer. The expedition was successful, and by the time the army returned to Milan, Leonardo had filled a notebook with rapid sketches of landscapes he had seen on the way and lots of rivers and lakes. He had studied the plumbing system of palaces. He had made friends with Louis's court painter, Jean Purel, like himself a jack of all trades. These two painters discussed engineering, architecture, mathematics, and astronomy together. For one of the celebrations when the army returned to Milan, Leonardo constructed a great mechanical lion that moved around, driving a mechanical dragon out to sea. The dragon had a fight with a cock, symbol of France, and the cock pecked out its eyes. Then Leonardo returned contentedly to his studies. All through the winter and until early spring, he worked as he liked. Sometimes he worked on anatomy, which was again claiming his attention, and at his studies of the stars. But then, in 1510, he was interrupted by the next development of the war. The old Pope, Julius II, had been growing uneasy for some time. As well he might have been, because of the growing power of Louis II of France. Julius II became definitely worried when Louis defeated the Venetians. It did not suit his ideas to see that powerful Italian state controlled by a French king. He had always been friendly with the French, but now suddenly, without any warning, he took up the cause of Venice. He enlisted the aid of the Swiss, and though he was a very old man, he went himself to the war. Together the Venetians and the Pope's troops succeeded in beating the French at Correggio. Chaumont, who led the French army, was ill at the time. Shortly after the battle he died, and so Leonardo lost one of the best friends he had ever had. The French rallied, but the next viceroy of Milan, too, was promptly killed in battle. Victory passed back and forth from hand to hand. In the next few years Milan had several masters. Most of Leonardo's friends and patrons were either killed or driven out. Trivulzio, who had ordered the bronze horse for his tomb, fled to France with the retreating army. The tomb was never built. Leonardo had no income, for now that his friend King Louis was no longer monarch of Milan, the pension stopped. Sometimes the Swiss occupied the city, sometimes the Germans. Then one of the Forza heirs came back to the throne. Leonardo could not keep pace with these changes. He had his vineyard still and his house, but what was he to do for a living? He was more than 60 years old, but a new start was necessary. It was autumn 1513. The French had just retired to France, possibly for the last time. Leonardo made up his mind. In September, on the 24th, he took to the road once more. With his little household of pupils, he set out for Rome. Pope Julius II had died, and Pope Leo X was reigning in his place. This looked as if it would be a fortunate thing for Leonardo, because Leo X was a Medici. Like all his family, he was probably interested in the Tuscan painter, who had his first chance through the Pope's illustrious father, Lorenzo de' Medici. But the two men did not yet know each other well. Rome was practically new territory to Leonardo. He and his entourage stayed for a while at an inn, but he was soon relieved to get an offer from the Pope to move into the Belvedere. This was honor indeed. The Belvedere was a summer palace belonging to the church. It was high on the Vatican Hill, with a beautiful garden up the slope, approached by a wide marble staircase. There was the Pope's private zoo, just the sort of thing Leonardo loved. It contained lions, panthers, apes, parrots, and even a white elephant. Pope Leo X was a great collector. He loved his animals. He also made a collection of rare flowers and herbs and trees. There was an excellent library of ancient books in his palace, and Leonardo was free to study and use all these things. The Pope's brother, Giuliano de' Medici, lived in Rome. He had already met Leonardo. In spite of the difference in their ages, Giuliano was a young man. They became good friends. Giuliano was delicate and sickly. He was a philosopher who preferred study and a quiet existence to all other things. His chief interest was literature. He had written some poems in his time, but he was also attracted to the studies of music and alchemy, which men still took very seriously in those days. Leonardo spent a good deal of time rigging up equipment with which his friend pursued experiments along these lines. It was Giuliano, not the Pope, who paid Leonardo for his living, and made him a generous allowance. Leo X was not exactly stingy, but he wasn't interested in Leonardo's kind of research. With Giuliano's help, the artist fixed up his living quarters in the Belvedere, in apartments that had not been occupied for some time. Everything had to be put in, and everything is listed in the notebooks. Partitions, wainscoting, kitchen, windows, a new terrace, furniture, and most important of all, an elaborate workshop. In this workshop, Leonardo, with the help of a German workman, made mirrors and other things for Giuliano. He made much use of metal screws. Most people of the day did not use screws because they found them too difficult to make. But Leonardo invented thread cutters that would turn them out without the need of filing them down. His method was devised again in America 150 years ago. As things turned out, it was very fortunate for Leonardo that Giuliano de' Medici had befriended him. Otherwise, he would soon have found himself neglected and crowded out. Rome, the spiritual capital of the world, had long been the place to which all footloose artists turned. Most of the famous painters of Leonardo's generation had tried their luck with the Vatican years before. One in particular, Bramante, was well known to Leonardo because they had worked together in the old days under Lodovico in Milan. Bramante was an architect and builder. In Rome, while Julius II was alive, he made his name by constructing the buildings the Pope had wanted to put up in a great hurry. Bramante was careless, however, and often used material that was not strong on a design that would not withstand weight and the wear of time. Though he and Leonardo had known each other very well, he was now too rich and busy and proud to take any notice of the new arrival. He had a protege in young Raphael. Under Bramante's wing, Raphael got nearly all the plumes of commission that the Vatican could offer. When he was hardly more than a youth, he made his fortune. Now in 1510, when Leonardo arrived, Raphael was 30 years old. Michelangelo was living in Rome also. He had just finished the famous ceiling in the Sistine Chapel. Leonardo went to see it, and he didn't think it so wonderful after all. He thought all that display of muscles was unnecessary. It was all very well to know your anatomy, but you didn't have to use it in such an exaggerated way, he said. Oh, painter anatomist, take care not to become a wooden painter through too strong an emphasis on bones, muscles, and sinews. Michelangelo's figures sometimes look as if they had been flayed alive. But however much of the old enmity still existed between the two great men, they seem never to have come to open quarreling again. They now moved in very different circles. Leo X was an unusual pope. He had a quick mind and enjoyed strange, interesting things from foreign lands, as for instance his animals and plants. But he was not genuinely fond of painting. Naturally, because his brother pressed him to do so, he ordered a painting from Leonardo. But ill-wishers at his court told him that this new painter was experimenting with the varnish, with which all finished pictures were covered for protection, before he had got started on the painting itself. The Pope was at once amused and vexed. He said, "Alas, this man will never get anything done, for he is thinking about the end before he begins." And that was that. Leonardo's career as papal artist was finished. Leo X much preferred young Raphael, and because he depended on Raphael to do all the painting he wanted, everybody else in Rome followed his example. That was the way the world went. Leonardo was used to being neglected, but no doubt he felt bad about it. However, Raphael was not aggressive or unkind to him as Michelangelo had been in Florence. There is an amusing story about these two artists, Michelangelo and Raphael. Michelangelo's passionate nature suffered in Rome as it had done in Florence, because he wasn't considered the greatest artist of them all. His enmity was now directed at Raphael, naturally, because Raphael was so very successful and rich and petted by the nobility. Raphael loved to dress in gorgeous clothes and parade through the streets of Rome with his pupils all around him. One day Michelangelo saw him like this and took it as a personal insult. He walked up and stood in Raphael's path and shouted, "There you go with your escort, as if you were a general." Raphael just smiled and retorted, "And there you go, all alone like a hangman." His pupils roared with laughter. Michelangelo never stopped attacking Raphael, saying that everything the younger man knew had been learned from Michelangelo. Raphael didn't reply to these attacks. He was really an amiable man, and when he mentioned Michelangelo, he was always very polite, admitting that he had learned a good deal from him. Raphael also spoke admiringly of Leonardo and sometimes gave him jobs to do. But among most of the artists of that world, Leonardo had the reputation of an eccentric, who, though he painted like an angel, preferred to spend all his time studying some crazy philosophy or other. In other circumstances, Leonardo might have remained in the ruler's good graces by showing his talent for mechanical toys. As it happened, at the papal court, Leonardo needed something he did not have, a fluent knowledge of Latin. People around the Pope always spoke Latin. Now Leonardo regretted that as a schoolboy he had refused to study his Latin. He tried to improve his knowledge, but either he was too busy at other things or he just wasn't good at languages. It seems odd that there should have been anything Leonardo couldn't do well. Besides, he wasn't sympathetic with the sort of thing Leo X liked. The Pope, though a rather young man, was enormously fat. He had his special followers who knew how to amuse him. They all loved silly practical jokes, which, like most jokes of that sort, were often cruel. He surrounded himself with grotesque men, all jesters. There were a queer little dwarf, and a great fat monk, and others of the sort to share the Pope's sense of humor. All these people were given favors and very good fortunes, but in this company there was no place for Leonardo. However, he too turned his hand now and then to a joke to amuse the fat, bored Leo X. He made balloons out of wax in the shape of different animals or funny faces and flew them in the Vatican gardens. He found an unusual looking lizard one day and spent hours and hours covering its whole body with scales and attaching to it a beard and horns. He kept it in a box which he would suddenly open when anybody called on him. The little monster would rush out and scare the strangers into fits. Leonardo loved to stroll in the papal gardens. There he made a number of careful drawings of the plants and flowers he saw around him. Again, these observations brought him to the discovery of natural laws that no one else had seen. He noted that the leaves of different plants grew according to certain consistent rules, in order to get the maximum amount of sunlight even low down on the stem. He found out that you can tell the age of a tree by the number of rings in the trunk's cross-section. He enjoyed the beauty of the flowers and trees. When he wasn't studying them scientifically, he made a lot of observations as to how to paint them. Remember, O painter, that the variety of depth or shade in any one particular species of plants is in proportion to the rarity or density of their branches. When the sun is in the east, the trees are darker toward the middle, while their edges are light. It was as well that Leonardo had these pursuits, for he seemed to have slipped out of any place in public life. The most outstanding proof of this was that when Isabella d'Este came to Rome, she made no attempt to see him or to get that painting she had wanted for so many years. Instead, she had her portrait painted by Raphael. Giuliano de' Medici's brother had placed him in charge of 4 cities: Modena, Parma, Piacenza, and Reggio. Now he sent Leonardo to Parma, possibly to inspect the fortifications there. On this trip, Leonardo also traveled over the Pontine marshes south of Rome. These marshes were notorious for breeding fever and pestilence. The Pope, perhaps because of his fat, was very subject to fevers and worried a lot about his health. He was particularly afraid of the marshes. Giuliano was glad to assent when Leonardo suggested draining them off by digging rivers through them and drying up the land. The work was actually begun and ended successfully long after both Giuliano and Leonardo were no longer in Rome. Giuliano was still in his early 30s, but he had the constitution and the habits of an old man. The Pope watched him anxiously, for these brothers were very fond of each other. For some time, there had been talk in the Medici family of marrying off Giuliano. Now the moment seemed to have arrived when Leo X found a French princess, Philiberta of Savoy, who seemed very suitable. Louis XII was much in favor of marrying this girl to the Pope's brother. She was a hunchback and not very pretty. Giuliano was not keen on getting married in any case, but because the Pope wished it, he consented. Early in January 1515, Giuliano set out for France. He looked even more ill than usual, and Leonardo could not feel happy about the trip. After seeing the procession off, he went back to his studio, much depressed. With Giuliano out of Rome, it was as if nobody friendly was left. Leonardo had heard bad news too. Louis XII had died suddenly. Like many other people, Leonardo needed something tucked away in the back of his brain that could be used as an escape. He had depended on Louis XII. He liked to feel that he would be welcomed at the French court, if ever he needed to go. Now that avenue was closed. Unhappily, he wrote, the Magnifico Giuliano de' Medici left Rome on the 9th of January, 1515, just at daybreak, to take a wife in Savoy, and on the same day fell the death of the King of France. His forebodings were correct. Giuliano had hardly gone when Leonardo began having trouble with George, his German assistant in the workshop. The man was surly and impertinent. Without Giuliano to discipline him, he began staying away. He was absent for 2 months, drinking and saying he was working at Giuliano's business, so Leonardo couldn't order him about. George had a friend, another German named Johannes, who worked with him on the mirrors. Johannes, too, turned against Leonardo. The two Germans stole some of Leonardo's inventions and even some of his material for making mirrors. Like many other scholarly people, Leonardo remained calm in the face of big catastrophes. He never flew off the handle, for instance, when he was forced to move outright from Milan because of the war. But he could not take small annoyances. This petty squabble with workmen sent him into a fit of exasperation. He wrote long complaints against George and was impatient for Giuliano to come back so that he could see justice done. And then, to make matters worse, he fell ill and was under a doctor's care for some time. In the meantime, Giuliano was safely wedded and on his way back. But in Florence, he, too, fell ill and had to take his bed. So Leonardo willed away at the time, writing to him, going over the grievances he had against the wicked German deceiver. Slowly Leonardo recovered, but slow as his cure was, it was faster than that of Giuliano in Florence. Leonardo filled in the waiting with a sudden spurt of energy, getting his scientific treatise in order once more for publication. As always, when he looked over his notes, he found himself starting out on a new series of studies. At first, the sketches he made were not so delicate as those in his older style. His sickness, whatever it was, had made him weak and spoiled his control. But in time he got over this, and his hand regained its cunning. George ran away rather than face the music when Giuliano was expected home, but Johannes, the mirror maker, stayed in Rome. He determined to get in some dirty work against Leonardo before judgment should overtake him. He went to the Pope and complained that Leonardo, during his anatomical studies, had broken the laws of the Church by dissecting human bodies. Since the days of Pope Boniface VIII, there had been a general condemnation of dissection, but there was no law against it. Besides, Leonardo was only one of many people who made scientific studies by this means. For nearly 50 years, there had been no complaints from anyone. The popes who preceded Leo X had not interfered with these studies. The spirit of the Renaissance, the general eagerness for learning, had kept people safe in their researches. But Leo X was a lazy man, very careful of his position. He was not likely to defend Leonardo against ignorant attacks of this sort, especially with his brother still lying ill in Florence, where he couldn't speak up for his favorite. To justify himself, Leonardo hastily prepared a paper on human speech, with a great number of beautiful drawings illustrating the muscles of the tongue and the anatomy of the throat and mouth. Through this, he hoped to show the value of such scientific studies. Leonardo handed this in to the Pope's chamberlain, but nobody paid any attention to it. The whole work, with all its careful drawings, was neglected and lost. Leonardo continued to worry about the accusations, and he had reason to do so. It was no light thing to be accused of behaving contrary to church laws, but a greater trouble now pushed all this from the Pope's mind and also from Leonardo's. Unlike Julius II, Leo X was no warrior. Indeed, Julius II had been an unusual pope in his love of fighting. For a long time, Leo X had managed to play off one country against another in his desire to keep the peace, but it was getting harder and harder to do so. Francis I had succeeded Louis XII as King of France, and he was determined to conquer Milan all over again. The French also demanded Parma and Piacenza, which were presumably under the guardianship of Giuliano. Leo X sent Giuliano at the head of the papal troops to defend these cities, but Giuliano was still not well enough for such an effort. He collapsed before reaching the battlefield, and it became clear that he had not long to live. When Leo X heard that the French king had retaken Milan and that the French were triumphantly in charge once more, he hurried to arrange peace at any price. He went all the way to Milan to talk it over with the king. During the troubled early months of 1516, there is no hint of what Leonardo was doing. He may have been called in to accompany the Pope on his journey, as a man who had lived long in Milan and knew the ways of the French. He may have met the new king, nobody knows. What is certain is that in his enforced idleness, he wrote a strange description out of his vivid imagination of how to make pictures of the deluge. No doubt his long studies of water gave him the inspiration for this. Many of the sketches of his notebooks during these years are of waves, water in turmoil, or land being eaten away by floods. He made a list of things to be remembered in the pictures he described: darkness, wind, tempest at sea, floods of water, forests on fire, rain, bolts from heaven, earthquakes, and the collapse of mountains, overthrow of cities, people on trees which are unable to support them, trees and rocks, towers and hills covered with people, boats, tables, troughs, and other means of floating, hills covered with men, women, and animals, and lightning from the clouds illuminating everything. For pages he wrote of these catastrophes, and now and then broke off in his writing to illustrate them more vividly. These thoughts were interrupted by a catastrophe more near to his reality. In March 1516, Giuliano de' Medici died. Giuliano had been Leonardo's only hope and comfort in Rome. Now he was gone. For a little while, the aging painter lingered in the city, but it was clear that he would never get any recognition from Leo X and only the most grudging help. Leonardo made up his mind to take for the third time a step which had never failed to bring him relief in his hurt vanity. He would go to Milan and attach himself to the train of the new French king, Francis I, who was still there. Farewell to the cheerful, fat, silly Pope Leo X and all his works. Leonardo reflected on fate that had made the Medici influence his life so strongly. In his youth, Lorenzo neglected him, but sent him with a silver lute to try his fortune in Milan with Lodovico il Moro. And now Leonardo was an old man going to Milan again. The Medici made me and broke me, he wrote. No one who knew him at that moment, when his spirits were at their lowest ebb, could have foreseen that this story would have a happy ending. Yet it was so. Leonardo went to Milan, and there the king, Francis I, gave him the appreciation that was his right. When Francis I went back to France, Leonardo da Vinci was with him, court painter to the king.